Nobody expected this move, and now the entire hockey world is asking the same question. John Chayka promised to build a stronger Maple Leafs team around Auston Matthews, but one decision has divided fans and analysts across the NHL. Did Toronto finally create a true Stanley Cup contender? Or did Chayka leave, one major problem unsolved? When John Chayka became the new general manager of the Toronto Maple Leafs, everyone knew change was coming. But very few people expected him to reshape the team so quickly. Instead of making one or two small moves, Chayka changed several important parts of the roster. He brought in new players, added more size and experience, and tried to build a team that could survive the long and difficult road to the Stanley Cup. His message was clear. The Maple Leafs needed to become deeper, stronger, and harder to play against. For years, one question has followed the Maple Leafs everywhere they go. Can this team finally win when it matters the most? Toronto has had one of the best goal scorers in the world in Auston Matthews, yet the team has continued to fall short in the playoffs. Every offseason, fans hope the front office will find the missing piece that can help Matthews lead the team to a championship. This summer, all eyes turned to John Chayka. Chayka did not sit back and wait. He made several important moves to give the team a different look. Toronto added veteran goaltender Sergei Bobrovsky, giving the club an experienced goalie with a Stanley Cup winning background. The Leafs also added forward Jack Roslovic and traded for Nick Paul, bringing more depth and physical play to the lineup. Chayka later explained that his goal was to make the team deeper, faster, bigger, and heavier. It was a clear sign that Toronto wanted to change its identity instead of relying only on skill. At first, many fans praised these moves. The Maple Leafs looked tougher than before. The bottom six forwards appeared stronger, and the defense looked more balanced. Some hockey experts even said this was one of the biggest offseason makeovers in recent team history. But as the excitement settled down, another question quickly began to spread across the hockey world. Did John Chayka actually do enough to help Auston Matthews? That question has become one of the hottest topics surrounding the Maple Leafs. While many analysts agree the team improved its depth, others believe Toronto is still missing another elite offensive player who can take pressure off Matthews. Right now, Matthews remains the player every opponent focuses on. If teams can slow him down in the playoffs, who will consistently step up beside him? And that's exactly where Chayka's biggest decision is now being questioned. Instead of making one blockbuster move for another superstar scorer, he chose a different path. It was a bold gamble, and now the entire NHL is watching to see whether that choice will finally bring the Stanley Cup back to Toronto or become the decision everyone remembers for the wrong reason. John Chayka's biggest decision was not only about the players he added, it was also about the players he refused to give up. One name that stayed at the center of attention was Matthew Knies. During the offseason, reports said the New York Rangers showed serious interest in the young forward. Many fans wondered if Toronto would use Knies in a blockbuster trade to bring in another star. But Chayka chose a different direction. The Maple Leafs held on to Knies because they believe he is a major part of the team's future, alongside Auston Matthews. That decision surprised many people around the league. Instead of chasing one huge trade, Chayka showed confidence in the young talent already inside the organization. This move also tells us something about Chayka's long-term plan. Rather than sacrificing young players for a quick fix, he appears to be building a team that can compete for more than just one season. Knies has continued to develop into a powerful forward who can score, win puck battles, and play the physical style that becomes so important during the playoffs. If he takes another step forward this season, Toronto may not need to search outside the organization for more offense. But until that happens, the debate will continue. Another reason this discussion has become so popular is because everything still comes back to Auston Matthews. He remains the face of the franchise and one of the NHL's best goal scorers. Every team that dreams of winning the Stanley Cup needs its biggest stars to perform. But hockey is never a one-man game. Even the greatest players need strong teammates around them. That is why so many analysts are asking the same question. Has John Chayka built enough support around Matthews? Or is one important piece still missing? So far, the reactions have been mixed. Some fans believe the Maple Leafs are finally built for playoff hockey. They point to the added depth, stronger defense, experienced goaltending, and a roster that looks tougher than it did a year ago. Others are not fully convinced. They believe Toronto still lacks another elite top 6 scorer who can help Matthews when opponents focus all their attention on shutting him down. Until the season begins, no one can say for certain which side is right. One thing is clear though, John Chayka did exactly what every general manager hopes to do. He gave people something to talk about. His decisions have changed the conversation around the Maple Leafs. Now the pressure shifts from the front office to the players. If this new roster finally makes a deep playoff run, Chayka's bold strategy will be praised as a masterstroke. But if the same problems return when the games matter most, every offseason move will be questioned again. The answers are still months away. But one thing is certain, the entire hockey world will be watching every step the Maple Leafs take, because this season could define John Chayka's legacy in Toronto.
Something happened inside the Maple Leafs organization that most fans completely missed. It wasn't the first overall pick, it wasn't the trade rumors, and it wasn't free agency. It was a series of decisions that, when connected together, reveal a blueprint that could change this franchise for the next decade. Here's why I think Toronto will never be the same after this offseason. The biggest mistake people are making right now is assuming this offseason is about replacing one player or filling one position. It isn't. This is about changing the identity of the Toronto Maple Leafs. When organizations miss expectations, they usually look for quick fixes. They fire a coach, make a trade, or sign a free agent and hope things improve. That's not the impression I'm getting here. Everything that's happened since the front office changed points toward a much larger plan. It really started when Toronto won the draft lottery. That moment changed the entire direction of the franchise. Instead of entering another offseason wondering how to squeeze one more playoff run out of the current core, the Maple Leafs suddenly found themselves with something every organization dreams about: the opportunity to draft a potential franchise player first overall. They used that pick on Gavin McKenna, a player the organization believes can become one of the faces of the NHL for years to come. The selection wasn't viewed as just adding another talented prospect. Internally, the belief is that players like McKenna have the ability to reshape an entire franchise. Here's what caught my attention even before the draft. The messaging coming from the front office wasn't centered on immediate results. Instead, the focus was on long-term impact. John Chayka spoke about identifying the player who would become the best over the course of his career, not simply the player who could contribute the fastest. That's an important distinction because it tells me this management group is thinking several years ahead, not just about next season. From what I've been told, that's become the foundation for every decision they're making. Every trade discussion, every contract evaluation, every roster decision is being measured against one question: does this help build a sustainable contender, or is it simply solving today's problem? That's why I don't believe McKenna is expected to carry this franchise immediately. There will naturally be enormous expectations. Whenever you're the first overall pick in Toronto, the spotlight is impossible to avoid. Auston Matthews experienced it. Every elite prospect experiences it. But internally, the organization appears determined to develop McKenna the right way instead of rushing him simply because of the market. His talent isn't in question. The challenge is making sure the environment around him allows him to reach his full potential. Now, here's where everything starts connecting. When I look at the rumors surrounding Toronto's blue line, I don't just see a team trying to acquire another defenseman. I see an organization asking a much bigger question: what should the defense look like when Gavin McKenna reaches his prime? That's why names like Zach Werenski continue appearing in league discussions. To be clear, nothing has been confirmed, and there's no verified report saying a deal is close. But multiple reports have linked Toronto to interest in exploring elite, proven defensemen as part of its roster transformation. Whether those conversations ultimately lead to Werenski or another player is almost secondary. The important takeaway is that the Maple Leafs are clearly exploring ways to build a stronger foundation on the blue line. The same applies to Morgan Rielly. I've seen plenty of fans immediately assume that any mention of Rielly in trade speculation means the organization wants to move on from one of its longest-serving leaders. I don't think it's that simple. Here's what I'm hearing. The Maple Leafs aren't looking at this emotionally. They're evaluating every major contract on the roster through the lens of where this team wants to be 3, 4, and 5 years from now. That doesn't automatically mean Rielly is getting traded. In fact, John Chayka has publicly downplayed the likelihood of moving him. At the same time, league insiders continue to believe teams are asking questions because Rielly remains one of the most respected defensemen available if Toronto ever chose that path. That's an important difference. Interest from other teams doesn't equal availability, but it does tell me something else. General managers around the NHL believe Toronto is open-minded enough to at least listen. That's very different from previous years when certain players felt completely untouchable. Under this new management group, I'm getting the sense that almost every decision begins with one principle. If a move genuinely makes the organization stronger over the long term, it deserves consideration. That's a philosophical shift more than anything else. Another thing that stands out to me is how often the word collaboration has come up since the new hockey operations group took over. When Chayka has spoken publicly, he's emphasized alignment between the front office, the coaching staff, scouting, and player development. That may sound like standard executive language, but around the NHL, it's viewed as a meaningful change. Instead of isolated departments making separate decisions, Toronto appears determined to build one unified vision that stretches from the draft table all the way to the NHL bench. And that's why I don't believe this offseason should be judged by one blockbuster trade or one expensive free agent signing. The real story isn't whether the Maple Leafs acquire Zach Werenski. It isn't whether Morgan Rielly remains part of the organization. It isn't even whether Gavin McKenna makes the opening night roster. The real story is that for the first time in years, every major decision appears connected to one long-term blueprint rather than a series of short-term reactions. From where I'm sitting, that's the biggest change of all. Because when an organization finally commits to a single vision, every move starts making more sense. The draft pick makes sense. The patience makes sense. The willingness to explore trade possibilities makes sense. Even the rumors themselves begin fitting into a larger picture. And the deeper I dig into what's happening around the league, the more convinced I become that this blueprint is still only in its opening chapter. But here's the question I keep coming back to. What does success actually look like for this organization now? For years, success in Toronto was measured almost entirely by what happened in the spring. Every offseason was about finding one more piece that could help an already established core get over the hump. Add another veteran, find another scorer, upgrade the bottom six. It was always about maximizing the current window. I'm not convinced that's the philosophy anymore. From what I've been told, this front office is trying to build something that lasts, not something that simply gives them one more chance. That's a very different approach, and it explains why so many recent decisions feel connected instead of random. Take the blue line, for example. I've heard plenty of debate about whether Zach Werenski is the perfect fit for Toronto. That's a fair conversation because you're talking about one of the league's premier defensemen. But when I look at the bigger picture, I think the real question isn't whether the Maple Leafs want Werenski. The real question is whether adding an elite minute-eating defenseman accelerates the timeline they've already started with Gavin McKenna. That's why the speculation makes sense. It isn't about making a headline. It's about building a roster that can support a franchise player over the next decade. Now, to be clear, there is still no confirmed indication that Columbus intends to move Werenski, and there is certainly no agreement in place. But league reporting continues to connect Toronto to the conversation because the Maple Leafs are actively evaluating high-end options to reshape their defense. That alone tells me this management group isn't afraid to think big when the right opportunity presents itself. The same principle applies to Morgan Rielly. I've seen a lot of people treat every rumor as if his departure is inevitable. I don't see it that way. Here's what I'm hearing. Toronto's leadership has had ongoing conversations with Riley and his representatives, but the public message from John Chayka has been that he doesn't expect a trade as things currently stand. New head coach Jim Hiller has also spoken positively about coaching Riley again and described him as part of the solution. That doesn't eliminate speculation, but it does tell me the organization isn't forcing an outcome. They're evaluating every possibility while keeping the door open to multiple paths. And honestly, that's exactly what smart organizations do. They don't make emotional decisions. They don't move respected veterans simply because social media wants something dramatic to happen. They ask one question: does this move make us better? If the answer is yes, they explore it. If the answer is no, they move on. That's the impression I've gotten from this front office since the day it took over. Another detail that shouldn't be overlooked is how patient this group has been. We've already seen opportunities to make aggressive moves, yet they haven't acted just for the sake of activity. Chayka himself has acknowledged that the organization explored numerous possibilities, including discussions involving additional top 10 draft picks, but emphasized there were limits to what they were willing to pay. That tells me discipline is becoming just as important as ambition. I think that's going to define this era more than any single transaction. Fans love blockbuster trades. General managers love value. Those aren't always the same thing. Sometimes the smartest move is the one nobody notices until 2 or 3 years later. Then there's Gavin McKenna. I've been asked countless times whether he'll immediately become the face of the franchise. My answer is simple. Eventually, yes. Immediately, that's a completely different conversation. Being the first overall pick is one thing. Becoming the player an entire organization builds around is another. The Maple Leafs don't need McKenna to save the franchise in October. They need him to become the best version of himself over the next 10 years. Everything I'm seeing suggests that's exactly how they're approaching his development. They're building the environment first and allowing the player to grow into it rather than asking an 18-year-old to carry one of hockey's biggest markets on day one. That's a patient approach, and in today's NHL, patience is often rewarded. So when I connect every dot from this offseason, I don't just see a new general manager. I don't just see a first overall draft pick. I don't just see rumors surrounding elite defensemen or speculation involving longtime veterans. I see an organization that finally appears to know exactly what it wants to become. Will every decision work? Probably not. No front office gets every move right. There will be trades that don't pay off, prospects who develop slower than expected, free agents who sign somewhere else. That's the reality of building an NHL contender. But for the first time in a long time, I can actually identify the blueprint. There's a direction, there's consistency, and perhaps most importantly, there's a willingness to make difficult decisions if they move the organization closer to that long-term vision. That's why I believe this offseason won't be remembered for one trade or one draft pick. Years from now, people may look back at this summer as the moment the Maple Leafs stopped chasing quick fixes and finally committed to building something sustainable. Whether that ultimately leads to a Stanley Cup is a question nobody can answer today. But one thing is becoming increasingly clear. This doesn't feel like another offseason in Toronto. It feels like the beginning of an entirely new chapter. Something is about to happen in Toronto. The Brandon Carlo trade was the signal. 2 third-round picks for a defenseman they paid a first-round pick to acquire 15 months ago. From what I've been told, that is only the beginning. Morgan Rielly is next. The Auston Matthews situation is unresolved, and free agency opens in less than 72 hours. The deal went official Saturday afternoon in Buffalo. Toronto sent Carlo to the St. Louis Blues for picks 73 and 76 in the 2026 NHL draft. the Leafs turned around and used those picks on wingers Zach Olsen and defenseman Mans Gudmundsson. Now, let's put that return in context. 15 months ago, the Maple Leafs gave up center Fraser Minton, a top 5 protected first-round pick, and a 4th-round pick to acquire Carlo from Boston at the 2025 trade